Hi. Welcome to Society for the Performing Arts' first choreographer discussion between Michelle Dorrance and SPA CEO Meg Booth. Thank you to the Menil Collection and Museum Director Dr. Rebecca Ravenel for co-presenting this program and letting us use this lovely space. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Society for the Performing Arts is the largest nonprofit multidisciplinary presenting organization of its kind in the Southwest. Each year, Society for the Performing Arts presents internationally acclaimed artists from traditional to avant-garde alike, from large orchestras and dance companies to recitals and solo performers, for a diverse season of events. This new series of choreographer discussions seeks to provide greater access to the Houston community and insight into the creative process of great minds that create work we enjoy on the SPA's main stage. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Meg Booth is the new CEO of Society for the Performing Arts. Before coming to SPA, Meg worked as the Director of Dance Programming at the at the Kennedy Center, where she curated world-class ballet series and oversaw premier contemporary dance series and produced Ballet Across America Festival. Michelle Dorrance is a New York City-based tap artist and is the founder and artistic director of Dorrance Dance. She was mentored by Gene Melder, North Carolina Youth Tap Ensemble. Her choreography is performed throughout the world and has been featured in countless theaters, clubs, and festivals, including choreographic commissions from the Martha Graham Dance Company as part of their Lamentations Variations and high fashion short film for Tabitha Simmons. She's a 2018 Doris Duke Artist, 2017 Ford Foundation Art and Change Fellow, and a 2015 MacArthur Fellow. She is humbled to have been acknowledged and supported by the United States Artists, the Joyce Theater, the New York City Center, Jacob's Pillow, Princess Grace Foundation, The Field, and American Tap Dance Foundation, and the Bessie Awards. Let's give an applause for her. She's very accomplished, and we're really excited to have her. So thank you everyone for being here. Society for the Performing Arts will present Michelle and her company, Dorrance Dance, and their piece, ETM Double Down, tomorrow at Jones Hall at 7:30. We have flyers for you with some discounted to help you get a discounted ticket, so please see one of our staff members on your way out. And I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. Enjoy the talk.
Thank you, Shannon. Michelle, welcome to Houston.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Welcome to the Menil. Society for the Performing Arts is thrilled to present you and your company tomorrow night.
We're so excited to be here. This is our Houston debut as a company.
We're thrilled, and we're thrilled to bring you here. Today, I wanted to really organize the conversation into three different buckets. One is the making of Michelle Dorrance, your history, your background. The history and formation and culture of tap, generally speaking, and then talk a little bit about process and your evolution as an artist. So let's start with you and your background. I find your parents really fascinating.
Yeah, I love my parents. I do. I mean, I guess not everybody does. I got lucky. No, I have. My mother was a professional ballet dancer, so people are often like, "Oh, were you like going to be a ballet dancer like your mom?" But I knew at a very young age that I had flat feet and not like pretty mediocre flexibility, mediocre to like poor flexibility. And my father she danced professionally with Elliott Feld's first company in New York, and then also with National Ballet before it folded in DC.
Yes, in DC.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wondered if we'd ever talked about that before.
We have.
But my dad is like a huge legacy soccer coach and has one of the biggest sports dynasties in sports history at the University of North Carolina, coaching the women's soccer team. And he was also the coach for the men's soccer team at a time, but then the women's national team, and won the first Women's World Cup as a coach. So both my parents are very successful doing what they do, and also very honest with me about my aptitude for my love for what they did at a young age. So, and I knew, when I was like 10 or 11 that I wasn't going to be an international caliber soccer player or professional ballet dancer, but it was very clear at that point that I was already in love with tap dance and that was my gift if I had one.
And at some point, when did you find the North Carolina Youth Tap Ensemble?
It was just fortuitous that Jean Medler, who was mentioned before, was the tap teacher at the school my mom started, who now it has a number of partners now. Jean's a partner in the school. And he didn't start tap dancing until he was 27 and fell in love with the form, and then immediately started seeking out these gatherings that were happening. And this is like how tap dance is in our culture, and everyone can acknowledge it now today, because there was this period of time where tap dance had left, popular culture or, the entertainment industry. And there were these festivals that were happening in New York City, then in Colorado, Portland, and a few places that were a gathering of the living masters and elders in the form, a lot of whom had performed during the days of the movie musical, some even who'd performed in vaudeville. So Jean, as a young teacher, went to these festivals and would come back and be like, oh my gosh, we're changing everything. We changed the way we warmed up to be a much more sophisticated process. So slowly over the course of time, we learned with Jean, and then when he's founded a youth tap ensemble, even before I was old enough to be in it, he'd already started it. And then by the time we were sort of ready to go with him, I was like 12 years old, we'd travel with him to take these classes, and we're some of the only kids at the festivals at the time, so it was really cool. I mean, I can't tell you, myself and Nicholas Young, my collaborator, who I'll mention a lot tonight, because he's collaboratively created the work that we'll perform tomorrow, and also collaboratively created the Guggenheim work that we'll talk about later.
We'll talk about that.
But all that to say, and Nicholas and I met as kids at one of these festivals, which is cool. But wait, where was I going with that? Nicholas, just to say that like the development of the youth tap culture in the 90s was entirely due to the tap festivals. So
that is great.
It was a huge part of the education.
But now at some point you diverged and you went to school not to study tap.
Oh, yeah, but I didn't diverge. I went to New York City.
Okay.
And I went to school in New York City.
Did you intentionally go to New York City to be in an environment that you could continue practicing tap?
To me, it was the only environment to be in to be a tap dancer. There was a moment where I thought about Chicago, because there's a great tap community in Chicago, but part of it was also that Savion Glover had such a huge influence on us as teenagers, and he was teaching at this one festival in St. Louis where we had these great, incredible, groundbreaking to us master classes with him. And this is during the time where he's creating, he's really innovating a lot, and it was during the time where he's choreographing Noise Funk. So then he becomes absent from the festivals around the age of when I'm 16, because he's on Broadway. So, and that's one of our, he's 5 or 6 years older than my me. So where are we going to go but to New York? And there are also a number of other, professional dancers, choreographers, companies. There were just so many opportunities, but also people to study with, jam with, be around. New York City was where I went to tap dance, and then I just decided to go to NYU.
Study.
Yeah, it's not that I didn't look at dance departments, though. They were just not interested in tap dancers, even more so than now. Yeah.
And so after you graduated, Stomp.
Oh yeah, that's a big jump, only because I tap danced my butt off that whole time. I really developed a solo career during the time from when I graduated, and also danced with a lot of companies that are lesser known. I was in a company with Savion, for instance. Manhattan Tap was sort of at the end of when Manhattan Tap was touring. I did a season with Jazz Tap Ensemble in LA. I just flew out to do it. Mm-hmm. I worked with Max Pollock, who created a company called Rumba Tap. He's the only really kind of liaison as a tap dancer to Cuba, and still is. It's amazing. He's the only non-Cuban that's a member of Los Muñequitos de Matanzas. If any of you guys know that folkloric rumba tradition, it's unbelievable. Anyway, so whatever. I had the opportunity to work with so many different really beautiful choreographers and former teachers of mine before Stomp. So I should say that, because that was formative.
Now, you describe yourself as a choreographer, a dancer, and a composer.
Well, in our tradition, tap choreography is also composition, percussive composition.
Exactly. Do you want to talk at all about what comes first, the music or the dance?
I'm a big fan of following my musical instincts as opposed to, and that's not to say that there is never a moment in which a visual or organic feeling, kinesthetic idea or some sort of movement doesn't charge something, because absolutely it does. But the music is the point of origin for almost everything, or is the impetus for everything. And then, down to a refined detail, whether it's like a heel drop or a toe drop, those are two very different tones. And then your weight is in a different place. So everything has to do with the way we're approaching the floor. So, and there's this constant argument about, this is a very internal, insular argument in the tap community, like tap dancing versus hoofing, which seems like nomenclature to most people, but it's like a spiritual divide. And people can say hoofing is dancing from the ground up. Some people would make that argument, not placing something on top of your dancing, but allowing it to come organically from the feet. But there are many other arguments, but I would say that is one of them.
Would you consider yourself a hoofer?
I would consider myself both a hoofer and a tap dancer to escape all problems. Just in a very diplomatic answer. But I would hope I could.
That people would recognize both
I would
of
hope
you.
that one day, there won't be a problem with that conversation. We'll get there.
If you were to describe your style as a dancer,
Oh no.
Could you?
That's the worst.
not possible.
No, I would love not to.
I mean, it's interesting because you, as a collaborator and as an artist, are so embracing of so many influences that are seen throughout all of your choreography. I mean, I'd call you a polyglot. You do everything.
That's kind of
so,
what you say.
how do you respond to all of these influences? You love it all.
Well, I think I want to say where that comes from is improvisation being the root of what we do, but also I'm very lucky that Jean led us through that as young dancers, because a lot of dancers that, let's say, study in a studio or school, dance school environment, even a performing arts, pre-professional environment, improvisation now is, of course, so much more popular in the canon of modern and contemporary and postmodern study. But inside of those kinds of school and studio environments, it's not like there's improvisational classes that were, especially not in the 80s and 90s. But Jean, outside of class, would pool some money together and once a month hire one live musician to jam with us so that we had that experience. And we would circle up every single tap class and improvise. So that he made sure that what was at the core of tap dancing, which isn't always when it's taught, in that environment, was still at the core of our understanding of it. So that's, I guess, what I would say as far as my interest in, or my absorption in some sort of a bootleg way of a lot of other forms is also my, or is sort of the commonality of improvisation living inside of most of those forms. I would assume most of them that you observe are rooted in improvisation. So I think part of that is just a genuine response to someone you might be dancing with. There's that exchange where if you said a word, then maybe I would repeat that word, and even if it was an unfamiliar word, I would try to say it, or I'd say it my way, where you take what someone has said to you and try to make something new out of it. And that conversation, I think, is one of the most important things that happens in any kind of cultural or dance
I was
exchange.
interested a little bit more in improvisation because when we, as audience members, go into a concert hall and see you performing on stage, I think there's an expectation of a certain structure. And in fact, you do create a certain structure to the evenings, and EMT Double Down, we will see a structure to it, but you create room for improvisation.
Oh, yeah.
And improvisation with the other artists on stage. And it looks seamless as the audience member. Can you speak
Happy to hear it.
to how how do you design for that? How do you design for improvisation while still creating structure to fit within an evening concert in a concert hall?
I mean, yeah, that's interesting. You can trust certain improvisational moments to certain kinds of people as well. I mean, every single one of the dancers improvises at some point in the show. There are moments that can drastically change from night to night that rest in the hands of only a few people, sometimes one. And sometimes I don't agree with the choice that person makes, but I'm along for the ride. And because of it, everyone changes in response to it. So I think that's really important. But of course there's a skeleton surrounding any improvisational moment. But things can go off the hinges. It's not
So
that-
what happens
that-
when something goes off the hinge? What happens when one of your dancers does something that you disagree with?
It's so rare. And usually it's not the big things. It's always like these little teeny things. And I'm like, no. But I'm like, no. You should have stayed where you were, and you jumped over here. What happens? Honestly, I think everyone responds honestly, and as long as that's present, even if I don't think it was the strongest theatrical choice or wasn't congruent with my personal experience, which is so different than what the audience experiences. Like, and any performer in the room, or this, like, you can have a miserable show and move someone, and that is sometimes alienating. So you were in your head self-criticizing the whole time, and someone else was just really touched by something they saw for the first time, and maybe you were more present than you realized because you were angry or something. I don't know.
It might not have been your best show, but it was still impactful for those around you.
But often you're not your best shows are these shows that move people in a different way. So you have to let it go.
Yep.
You have to let the perfectionism go, because the messy stuff is sometimes the better emotional work.
Can we back up a little bit? You've talked a lot about history and foundation of the form. And in fact, when you look at the history of tap, which is an American percussive dance form, there's some disagreement about when and where it started, but I've heard you talk a little bit about it before, the formation along with the formation of blues, but
Right.
both predating jazz, American jazz.
Yeah, easy. But that's like known. I mean, I would assume so. I'm like, we all
Still
know
good to
that.
state. It's still good.
Well, no, I mean, like tap dance in its earliest form. I mean, most, anything rooted, any of our forms that are rooted in the diaspora, it's happening on the plantation, and there's no like questioning that. There's, and also just like very well documented slave uprisings that led to literally the drum being outlawed on slave plantations, and then body percussion and tap dancing developing as like
And just placing us in time, it's the early 1800s.
And actually I had one very like short quarter of a day and I, of course, very meticulously went through only the first level of the African American Museum at the Smithsonian.
good.
Yeah, I mean, this is a year ago
You
now almost.
need so much time
Well,
there.
yes. So but I learned so much more about the way, because we know this history of Irish indentured servants being the only or very rare Europeans that were quartered with slaves during this time period, which is another sort of source and point of origin of that cultural exchange happening. So that both not just a rhythmic conversation, but possibly a conversation in physical expression and percussive dance, et cetera. So many things that happened, but including really early uprisings that were multiracial. And I didn't know this until the museum, and I thought I knew a lot about this history. We're constantly being humbled with information, but it really blew my mind that then a number of laws were changed that elevated, this particular kind of indentured servitude in the status of a white European. Like there were a lot of different hallmarks inside of the legislative work that did this. It was really, horrifying and fascinating. Like, anyway, all that to say, that doesn't happen again until still before the 1900s, still in the mid to late 1800s, in a few places, most notably the Five Points neighborhood in New York City, where that cultural exchange between African Americans and Irish were happening there as well. And so you have those conversations and those, kind of things developing separately, but also in very specific environments where everyone was thrust together. So, and we know the great history of Master Juba, as his beloved name. William Henry Lane was the first world-famous tap dance champion. At the time, it wasn't called tap dance, though. It was called buck dancing or buck and wing. I think the word tap dance didn't appear, or the term tap dance didn't appear in print until after the turn of the century, after the year 1900. But so William Henry Lane, a great African-American dancer, defeats the Irish John Diamond in, this epic battle, because those contests were held at that time, buck and wing contests. So he's the first internationally famous American dancer, if that makes sense, because tap dance being an American dance form. And this is before, stride piano. And the early stride piano players are known of saying, or the guy that was sort of, and I can't think of his name because we all know Jelly Roll Morton, but gosh, I wish I could remember this gentleman's name. But he was saying, I was just imitating my favorite tap dancer. Yeah, there's like a lot of that kind of hallmark storytelling inside of the legacy of jazz music, that there's a lot of rhythmic impetus for stride, for early swing, for bebop especially, from tap dancers. So I love that cultural legacy as well.
Speaking of cultural legacy, it's important to name the names of the people that we stand on the shoulders of.
Yeah.
And knowing and standing on the shoulders of these historic greats, you call them elders, you can see the future and you can see where you can go and create. And so I wanted to just name some of the names that we had mentioned actually earlier tonight, but just see your response and your response to them. Busby Berkeley.
Huh.
Are these?
I didn't know if you just wanted to observe my actual response.
It was a good one.
I mean, Busby Berkeley's like a visionary, zany. Like what?
Yeah, I'm just curious, like how these people, Mabel Lee, you had mentioned, you spent time with last night.
This is, she just passed yesterday. She was 97. And she was part of our tradition and tap dance legacy, but was also a jazz dancer in the original term, jazz dance, vernacular dancer, and was an unbelievable, moving vocalist. She would never have called herself any of these things. She would say, I'm an entertainer, I do everything. And she did. She was also one of the funniest people I've ever known, in conversation as a friend and also theatrically. She had unbelievable comic timing. She was the sexiest woman alive at 97. It doesn't make any sense. She would barely be able to walk herself up to the stage in a walker, and she had a heel on, and she'd walk out like it was no problem. Like, she would just floor you. Yeah, she's like the original feminist to me.
Another extraordinary woman in tap is Dormisha Sumbry Edwards.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious to hear you talk about gender in the tap community.
Oh. My generation had such freedom, so much more so than anyone before us, and that came with a price tag sometimes, because some of our younger elders who worked really hard to get women into a flat shoe, for that to be accepted, for women to dance in an Oxford shoe as opposed to
A heel.
It was interesting. Dormisha, who originally, just to tell you a little bit about her, she is from Los Angeles, is one of the best tap dancers ever to live. And I am honored to call her a friend and collaborator and inspiration. She came out of the Kennedy School, Paul and Arlene Kennedy, who are part of a legacy. Their mother, Mildred Kennedy, was a teacher in Boston who originally taught Diane Walker, another one of our elders who we cherish. Anyway, Dormisha comes from this particular school and legacy in Los Angeles and was, touring professionally by the time she was like 8 or something ridiculous like that, 5, I mean, who knows. But she was part of a production called Black and Blue, and this was one of the first really important turning points in the way tap dance is present in our culture now. Black and Blue, and then Noise Funk, of course, being another one. But this show was ran in Paris for a while, and then was also on Broadway, and it involved a number of our elders, our master hoofers, and only 3 kids. And 2 of those kids, one of them is Dormisha, the other is Savion Glover, another Sid Glover, not related to Savion. But they had these sources just pouring information into them, like really elders, 70s and 80s. These guys are on stage, maybe some in their 60s, but and master stylists, individual innovators. These hoofers that were in this particular show taught them so much. So they are the reason they are who they are as artists is in part due to this. And of course, they're both brilliant. They're geniuses. But I would say about Savion and Dormisha. But all that to say, where are we going with Dormisha? Gender. She was in Bring the Noise, Bring the Funk, which was only cast in its original form male dancers, and she did the show in drag. And when Savion and the producers brought it back to do an international tour before, has never toured since, she kind of recreated a role as a woman in the show. And the kind of dancing that was happening in the 90s at that time, you wouldn't want to put a high-heeled shoe on to do. Like, you can't imagine, like, really throwing your weight around or your approach to the floor with a high heel on, but she put this heel on, and in part because it was historically accurate for her to be a woman in a heel theatrically at different points in the choreography. It was nuts. It was unbelievable. So she did this, and it like turned everything upside down, and all these girls who don't know how to dance in a heel or putting a heel on is a disaster. You know, when you see someone walking down the street wearing a heel who does not belong in a heel because they don't know how to walk in it? Yes. We've all seen it. It was like that, which is why I think there was such a backlash. Because not everybody was well trained, and you really do actually have to be able to pull up and figure out how to dance in a heel, especially putting your weight in different, whatever. You guys get it. So I guess what I would say is
she broke barriers.
She did, but she also has such a range, and I think that's what we've been given by our elders, talking about standing on the backs of people. We've been given a huge range. You can dance like any number of these people, and it's okay.
Let's move on, being that we are here at the Menil. Let's talk a little bit about process, and specifically as it relates to the creation that you did at the Guggenheim in 2017. You were one of the first artists commissioned to create a work for the Rotunda there in New York. Tell us about that process. How did it start?
So when Duke Dang, who's the artistic director of Works in Process, asked if I would be interested, I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to play the Rotunda. And immediately I called Nicholas, who is my collaborator for ETM as well. And he would be here if he weren't dealing with technical stuff at the theater, which I'm escaping from right now. Not that I want to, but anyway. So we couldn't wait to hear like the way things were going to play sonically at the Guggenheim. In the Rotunda, it's going to be so powerful. Immediately, I'm like, Nicholas is going to be on rollerblades with something that the air can like make noise through. You're not allowed to rollerblade down the Rotunda. You're not allowed to stand in front of this painting and make any noise. You're not like, there's so many. And then also we get in there, we start making noise. It's a terrible sonic space. It was awful. You don't want to hear tap dancing in there. It turns into white noise. We were like we were so humbled by that space so quickly and by the parameters. Every single painting has a different set of rules. Like they're in there every few feet, there's a different painting. So like all of these ideas that we had, like it was like a great lesson in collaboration and extreme bureaucracy and institutionalization. Like there were so many things that we learned, but also most notably how to play the space so that the sound the audience would be able to interact with or receive or experience the sonic ideas that we had in a way that felt good and in a way that hopefully could touch or move them. And then also visually choreographing from above in a space where you can't even yell down and be heard immediately was incredibly challenging.
Because the audience was along the entire ramp all the way up.
Yeah, no one except for actually Mabel and a few people in like a wheelchair were seated on the actual floor of the Rotunda. So everybody had some different version of a bird's eye view of the work.
Terrific. Yeah. And how long did it take you to really understand the acoustics in the space and to understand, because you didn't use exclusively shoes.
Oh no, shoes were very rarely used.
Yeah. You actually had people in sneakers.
Yeah, I mean, often we asked for our foot value to be 0, and we ended up being able to interact with so many different kinds of things because of it. I mean, and this is sort of a great testament to tap dancers as moving musicians. And it was a really like rewarding process for myself and Nicholas. Like we've toured with Stomp. I toured with it for almost 5 years. He toured with it for almost 10. Like we were so grateful for that experience because it was a, DIY musical experience for us. And we very, slowly over the course of time discovered what was successful sonically. I mean, honestly, you know right away whether it's going to be successful, and then trying to incorporate it is what takes time. So we ended up gravitating towards chimes. We used sand. When we finally got it approved that we could use the little water fountain, we used water drums, African water drums that resonated to us. We couldn't even tell until someone went up to the 4th ramp and they were like, this sounds amazing up here. You have to do this. But we couldn't tell on the Rotunda floor. It was such.
So did you do a lot of running up and down?
And you always have to have a babysitter go with you every time you go up. Like it was real.
The museum made you have a babysitter because you were there with the art.
If there were two people and you were going to go halfway around the rotunda and one person's here in the bump out, another person had to escort.
How long did it take you to create that piece, given that it was an active, open museum, open 6 days a week?
And then the days off, there were almost always events on the days off, so we only had nights. So
because it's not like there's another studio in the world that you can develop it in the studio and then just move it over.
Once we had ideas, though, we would go do that, and then we'd adjust it because we had such. I mean, they were very generous, but even within their generosity, it's only 6 to 11, or then like 9 to 2, or like it was absurd. And in the winter in New York.
How long did it take?
These poor dancers. Gosh, God bless everybody that did this project. We had a couple months of a lot of nights, but that's still like not even really as much time as you want.
Yeah.
So we tried to supplement it with studio time during the day, and then we go try something and it would or would not work. I mean, it was like a great
And because
experience.
of the site-specific nature of it, were you able to use any of that material and bring that onto concert hall stages, or that just exists?
Not yet. That's all I'll say.
Okay.
Yeah, who knows? But
Okay.
yeah, it was so very designed visually for that vantage point, so not yet.
Got it. We'll see EMT Double Down here at Jones Hall tomorrow night. Tell us about the evolution of that piece and the collaborators that you have, the musical collaborators, and Nicholas Young on that piece.
Yeah, so I'll mention Nicholas first because the reason he started working with electronic manipulation of tap sounds was really just to be amplified with this amazing Brazilian band that he was playing with. They're so loud. Ciro Baptista is the name of the band leader and composer. But so he was like, I need to put like a contact mic on my board. And then he realized instead of buying a number of expensive contact mics, he could just make them himself. So then he started making, out of a piezo element, you could just solder it to a jack and then plug something into the jack in there. You can just, do whatever you want with it.
Like you do.
I know. Well, he's a mad scientist. So he then started playing with different effects on these boards, and then realized he could basically make an electronic drum kit, but for his feet, with these boards. So he did. He made a number of little boards about the size of his foot that he could trigger while dancing on another board. So he could solo to his own compositions, which he could kind of also improvise. Of course, all those things had to be hooked up to a computer, and he figured out Ableton Live is this software that he fell in love with that a lot of electronic musicians use. Anyone who's interested in composing live, or controllerists, which is a very real thing. Everyone's like, is that a real word? We're doing really masterful things with this software, and Nicholas just kept studying and observing what different musicians that he was digging were up to. And there was this one guy, I think it's Greg DeLong, who was using Wiimotes and different game controllers to put different effects on some of the things that he would trigger. And so Nicholas learned how to do this as well. I mean, it was all from scratch for him. And then applying it to his own solo practice, he developed what he called Nicholas Young's compositional tap dance instrument. And I think that's how it's on YouTube. And he's always like, really sexy title. I'm like, yeah, I don't know what to tell you, dude. He's the one that put it up. So when he was first developing this solo, he invited a couple friends to see it, and he had me over to see it. And I was like, you have to do this in a show now. I was so excited. So the very first ever Dorrance Dance, full evening concert, I asked him to do it. And of course, a bunch of the technology failed, and he was totally upset with it, but I thought it went pretty well. Anyway, which also goes to show, even I was just like, Nick, I thought it was great. And he's like, this failed, and this was terrible, and he stormed off the stage. Anyway,
Back to our earlier conversation.
In conversation with Ella Baff, who's the former artistic director of Jacob's Pillow, she said, if you were to come back next year, which is after our very first engagement there with the Blues Project, we mentioned Dormisha earlier. It was a collaboration between myself, Dormisha, and Derek Grant, another incredible tap dancer, slightly older than myself, of our generation. And also with musician Toshi Regan and her band Big Lovely. All that to say, I was thinking, what different direction could we offer them, because the Blues Project was such a beloved project, and I've also been a fan of Toshi since I was 17, blah, blah, blah. But I thought to myself, if we were going to do something cutting edge, which is also what all of our elders always, pushed us to be ourselves and to innovate in our own directions. Nicholas was doing this work And I just thought, what if we did this on a big scale? Like, would he even be okay with it? And he was absolutely excited to do it. So producing many more of these boards and figuring out how to create compositions with all of the dancers and triggering and dancing at the same time was challenging. But that's sort of how it all came to be. And then involving Greg Richardson, our bass player first, and then my brother, Donovan, to help with different compositional elements. Now in its second incarnation, Double Down is like the second version of ETM. Things have come to like a much deeper compositional place, I think. And then also you guys, for those of you who can come to the show, I always think it's just a great gift to be on the road with our vocalist, Aaron Marcellus, who's like one of my favorite vocalists on the planet. And he improvises loops that he creates with the Wiimote because of the way Nicholas learned how to do this work. But he's so masterful, and they are improvised every night. They're brand new. He's so masterful at it, and I see him and Nicholas behind the computer, and I'm like, are you adding more effects to the Wiimote? Because Aaron now like has all the different axes and like all the different buttons do different kinds of reverberations or reverse the sound or like pull the treble out of the sound or like so. Aaron is now not only
every night.
Yeah, that's totally new every night, and
Great.
we all stand in the wings for it and like drool or cry or whatever happens because Aaron is really exceptional, and I'm not going to set it up for failure because it's always really beautiful to me. So I hope for those of you who come, you'll appreciate Aaron and continue to follow whatever happens with him because I don't know how much longer he's going to be able to tour with us. We'll see.
Hopefully a long time.
Me too.
Now, what is next? What is your next creative project that you're working on?
Oh, man.
Or is there not one? There's probably 8.
No, there are a couple. And I don't know if I can talk about one of them, but I will tell you that
about the process.
Yeah,
if you don't
true.
want to talk about.
Well, no, I've always wanted to.
When and where.
Well, I've always wanted to. So many people have, but I loved since I was a young person, and then watched my mom and some of her colleagues work to Duke Ellington's version of the Nutcracker suite or the Nutcracker score. His is a suite. And in recently kind of re-excavating my like love and all these buried tunes of Duke's when I worked with ABT this past fall, I just like, Duke Ellington, Billy Strayhorn are some of the greatest American composers that ever lived. Like, oh my gosh. And what the arrangement, the way they arrange that music. Anyway, so that's something.
You're working on?
Yeah, not yet, but it will. I mean, when do we'll have some time sometime
Why
soon.
don't we open it up to our guests here? Does anyone have a question for Michelle?
Here.
Oh, great.
Oh,
Here's a mic
you got a
for
mic.
you.
Yeah.
Can you hear it? Or I can also talk really loud.
Okay, so my question to you is, what do you look for in your dancers? I'm sure it's got to be oral. Is there a certain lift of the body? What sort of personality do you work well with? Do you have even a personality? Is there a mix? So what are you looking for in your dancers?
It's funny you should say that. I think that they are all so different is why it works so well. If we had even 2 or 3 of the same kind of personality, I don't think we would be this really like wonderful family that I get to travel with right now. I feel very lucky. But the dancers are so drastically different from one another. It's hard to pinpoint like this one thing, but I can tell you everyone has to have a strong improvisational voice as a soloist because of how much I love to explore that on stage. And my dancers become muses, really. I mean, so if I ever have to sub someone out, some other things have to shift, because there's no one like each of them to me. So I really love a strong individual style. Of course, kind of impeccable time and clarity. But there are some folks that are cleaner at certain things and still working on others, and I believe in, the idea of bringing each other up to the next level because we're all together. So there are strengths, there are various different technical strengths in the company, but everyone has to have a baseline of like clarity, impeccable timing. Like, that kind of stuff is just sort of, I don't want to hear a tap dancer that doesn't have great time period at the end. The same thing with a musician, you guys would feel the same way. But no, in fact, what I also love about my dancers is there isn't a certain kind of lift or carriage. There's so many different backgrounds in each of these dancers. I love what they bring to the choreography in the way they interpret it. Of course, there's some things that I want executed very pointedly physically, but I also really believe in, there's a point at which in this particular show, I call them I'm like, go to the apocalyptic flock section, and they all know what I'm talking about, because it's like the apocalyptic flock of birds is like one bird from each kind of species in a flock together, because there's none of them left. I don't know. So that's sort of the way, that's the way I think I would look at the company. Except that, we're all, this is the apocalyptic flock of the human race right now. I don't know. Yeah, and I guess I also hope to reach so many different kinds of human beings in a given audience. I always hope that there's someone to relate to, whether it is a superimposition, like superimposing oneself onto someone, or that's someone they can relate to, or, I don't know. I do really believe in that, the depth of that individual pull and connection. And I also love a group of bodies that do not look the same moving together and create. And I love the idea that there is meticulousness in the way we execute our footwork, and anything could happen in the upper body. And that is also really exciting to me as well. The tension in that. Yeah.
Hello. I have two questions. The first one is, what does EMT stand for in the show?
ETM. I know I should have said it, but
ETM,
it's easy
sorry.
to say. No, it's not your fault. This happens like every time anyone wants to say it, because who says ETM? ETM is like a riff on EDM. Like Nicholas was really like, are we gonna just call it ETM, electronic tap music? Yeah. So ETM, the initial approach, was the first work, and ETM double down, which sounds ridiculous, but like is very honoring exactly what happened for the second show. That, and like we were calling it ETM, like The Empire Strikes Back, and we just weren't working hard on the title. Like, yeah, we were all, ETM too. Like, it was bad.
Yeah. And then secondly, I'm a choreographer, and I've created work in museums, and I have more projects coming up, and I feel like interpreting the paintings in a museum is just this whole big subject to explore.
Yeah.
And I was wondering about your approach, whether it's like, I think of them as sort of set pieces, or like ideas to spring forth from, or they're actually active partners in the dance, like how do you approach it?
So in relationship to the Guggenheim specifically, this is really interesting. The exhibition that was going to be up when we performed was not up until 2 nights before we were there.
Oh, wow.
But no one, in looking to the rotunda floor, can see any of the paintings, except maybe the first and a half ramp can see, if they look this way, which we did have some vocalists on one of the ramps at some point. And then we played the parapet, which is like the railing, at one point as well, which was cleared by the museum. All that to say, this experience was really interesting. When it was their main collection that, their, what do you say? Yeah.
Permanent.
Their permanent collection. Lord have mercy. My museum vernacular is not present. But their permanent collection, they were reinstalling it on a given night. And I remember running up to the fourth, which is like our go-to ramp. I remember like running up the stairs, not even taking the elevator. I like ran up, and then I realized, no, I'd only run up to the third ramp. So then I like ran around the thing, and I just asked like if the security guard had to come with me, and they were like, no. And I ran by a Picasso and a Kandinsky, and it was like, and it was just like, it just changed the gravity of performing in the space. So having nothing to do with the actual painting, but I mean, first of all, I'm a huge fan of both of those artists, which is why I mentioned them specifically. But it like hit me. I'm like, this is a form that has been a bastard dance form for so long, and still is in so many ways. It's not institutionalized. Everyone treats tap dance like shit. It's entertainment, not art. It's like all these things. It's relegated to a little teeny piece of wood in like a cocktail party. Could you do a little something over here on this thing? Whereas like you'd lay out Marley and everything for a ballet dancer. You'd never ask a ballet dancer to do it. Like, could you just do your fouettes on this little piece of wood over here? Like that would never happen. It's just this thing that is, it's on the street corner, it stays on the street corner.
Except in Houston, where we're asking you to perform in our biggest theater.
No, and we're so honored. and I really like that we are touring in a concert dance circuit is important because I want people to respect the art form this way. I don't think it has to take that, but in this situation, I'm so grateful. All that to say, it was more the gravity of this space and the way we revere this kind of work and that kind of art that we were able to collaborate in a space like that. That was what I would say about those paintings. But in responding to actual material, which I've done before, and Nicholas also has done before, in like gallery spaces, never in a larger museum space. But sometimes I feel like there's something like literal, like very figurative that strikes me in a painting. And then in part because it's usually improvisational work as opposed to choreographic work. Anytime I've done that kind of responding to a painting, sometimes there's something that touches me emotionally inside of the work, and then it has nothing to do with the concept. And then, of course, if it is something that is structural for me, that can go in so many directions in a relationship to tap dance specifically. Of course, in relationship to the body's line and line, two-dimensional line in a an image or I don't know. I've never responded to a sculpture before, but all that to say, I've never actually choreographed in response to a painting. Only responded improvisationally. So I'm not very helpful, but I can tell you the weight of being around that collection was really powerful. And we were going to throw balloons off the edge with bells on them, and you could hear them ring all the way down, except that they were worried about the Calder, which was nowhere near where we were going to throw the balloons off of. And just to have like a fun institutional museum story, 10 different departments had to come watch us drop balloons off the thing to see whether it was approved or not. Because we were like, and then they approved one balloon getting dropped from the 5th ramp on the other side of the thing. I'm like, there's no way we can hit the Calder. We couldn't even hit the Calder if we tried. Because anyway, so all I had to say, but we respected that, and they said, so you could drop one, and I'm like, no, that's just gonna be cheap. Like, yeah, it'll just like a cheap little trick, throw the one balloon off. No, it was like about the environment and these things coming down and you're hearing them. So we didn't want to compromise what would have been a moving thing for like a shtick. So we didn't end up doing it, even though they did technically approve one balloon. So I don't know if that helps you at all, but I can tell you that. Probably not.
Yes. So I have a couple questions, and you can choose to answer both or none or whatever. I came here prepared to ask questions about the acoustics of the Guggenheim, but you kind of already covered that, and that comes from a very like internal nerdy part of me.
Yeah.
I also know that you've created works in like large empty chapels, spaces.
Yes.
So my question is, are there any other spaces that you've kind of happened into or come across or that very intentionally gone into that you would be excited to create a work in acoustically or otherwise? And then like separate sideways question, you talked a little bit about the masters and our elders. And are there any times when you create that you like to like directly point? I mean, I've seen Blues Project, I've seen that creation, but in any of like even this electronic work, things that you like to point to, like direct nods to, this is so-and-so. Like when Elizabeth was here in the fall, she did like one little thing that I was like, that's Gregory. You know, like, are there things that you like to do in your choreography, or do you just let that happen just by being who you are and where all of your dancers come from?
I'll start there in part because I think it's also an African tradition to call your ancestors into the space. And it's what we do when we quote our ancestors or elders or masters inside of our dancing. It's rare that I'll choreograph it into something, a direct quote, as opposed to a riff on a quote, except for very recently at the show that we just did in BAM. I literally was like, for whatever reason, I really wanted to do this series of things that blended one into another that would like quote this range of our masters at once. And it, like literally like 2 or 3 syllables each, like Chuck, like Steve Condo's, Jimmy, and then Leon, and then like right into Tip Tap and Toe. Like there was like this little series of things where I was like, this is what we're gonna do right here. So that's only happened one time. But other than that, I could say that, I mean, that's actually not even true. Inside of the Blues Project, there was a stop time section for a soloist, but the stop time was held by dancers quoting, myself, Dormisha, and Derek were talking very specifically about what those images were of our masters that we have in photographic memory. Like, oh, what's that one of Jimmy looking over his shoulder? Or what's that one of Bojangles with his hat? What's that one of Gregory? Like, you know, so we have those still images in our mind that we then called upon in that moment as well, in a very important part of the show, an important song. But I want the dancers all have that freedom inside of any of their work, and I love the remixing of the quotes. I also love a direct quote, so I can't argue with either thing. But I'm trying to remember the other thing you asked.
Spaces that you'd like to create.
Oh, right. The Armory, New York City. What is that going to sound like? It sounds like so many things, but there's also so much tech in there. Sometimes when I see something, I'm kind of curious about just the acoustics of it. Like, no, But my experience in St. Mark's Church is the chapel. And it was the opposite of the Guggenheim. Like, you could hear, like, this across the room, like my hand touching the floor. It was a magnificent sonic space. And the only reason I knew it is because Dormisha and I had an opportunity to perform there in a shared evening, create some work there. And I realized, like, whoa, the acoustics in this space, like, you can hear my foot in a sock on this floor. And then also we weren't allowed to tap dance on that very beautiful old floor. We had to like bring in this other floor. So then I thought, oh, are we going to slide around in our socks on this floor in protest and also honoring Jimmy Slide? Yes, we are. Yeah, so yeah, that I think any space like that immediately calls to you, it could even just be like you're moving through a train station and there's like a strange part of the room where you can hear an echo. I love, I think we all experience those kinds of things when we least expect it. And like, I wish I'd written down every single time, because then we could have a series of weird train station performances or something, but yeah.
We have time for one more question.
I was going to say you left off on all the many things she does as singing, so I have to add that to the list. And I especially liked your Steve Reich clapping, and I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Just that it's the most bootleg version of that Steve Reich composition. Here's why that happened. That I had to create that thing in 2 days, collaborating with these amazing dancers, but in a way that like didn't get too rhythmically complex too quickly, because what a mess. That actually, as much as I love that composition, it wasn't my original idea. It was Damien Wetzel's, who's the director of the Vail International Dance Festival, now the president of Juilliard, still directing the festival. But he said, what if you just riffed on this? And I was like, okay. And that's literally what we did. We just riffed on it, like not even honoring the full. I would love to play that. So what I can say about it is I would love to play that full composition. I love clapping. I love the different tonal variations in a clap. Nicholas is a masterful body percussion, and I just nerd out. Whenever he has the opportunity to teach a body percussion class, I'm like, I'm there. For a while I was a professional clapper. That's what you are when you're a stomper. Stomp reunion in March, anybody coming? I can't remember the date. I'm very excited about that. But yeah, all that to say, like the way we are so meticulous with our tones and sounds and a tap shoe, I love being able to apply that elsewhere. So when I realized, I love high fives. I love love. My mom would teach me flamenco palmas when I was younger, and she played castanets. I'm like, where did this come from? I don't know. And she was in an opera ballet, I guess. I'm trying to remember that, and I can't remember now. But all that to say, my mom's always been a really good clapper. My dad's really rhythmic. So like that element, I would love to further pursue. That's what I could say about that Steve Reich thing. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you to
you so
your
much,
artists who have been
Thanks for being here, guys.
out and about in the community, and I hope you can all join us in Jones Hall tomorrow night to see ETM Double Down.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nice.